Hi, I'm going to be discussing the Mayan and the Egyptian empires. Uh, Even though the Mayan and Egyptian empires were separated by thousands of miles of land and ocean, they developed very similar cultures. The way that they reached their defined cultures would have been was very different. Yet both civilizations helped societies with their contributions to technological and scientific achievements. Um, to go over some of the similarities, we have the polytheistic religions between the two empires. Uh, Both Maya and Egypt believed in many different gods that had human bodies and animal heads. The gods usually represented some form of their environment or procreation of well being. Um, Along those lines, basically, they were things to answer um, questions that they didn't have uh, answers to. They both made offerings to the gods to entice them for favored treatment. The gods have human traits and often interacted amongst themselves in human like ways. Um, some of the ways would be they would be fighting with each other, or they would be married and having a wife. Um, some of the most powerful gods, one for Egypt was Ra. He was the sun god. The Maya's most powerful god was Itzamna, the god of creation. Um, Anubis was the Egyptian god for protecting the dead, while Kisim is the god of the dead for the Mayans. There are many more similarities between the two empires based off their religions, but due to the difficulty of decoding Mayan hieroglyphs, there's not much known about all of their gods. Um, Another similarity they had was the pyramids. They both built pyramids, both in Egypt and Maya civilizations. They had pyramids on both of them, many of them. They were both built for sacred and religious reasons, and shows the people that lived in that society how they worked together to accomplish such great feats. Uh, both pyramid structures for Egypt and Maya had four corners and were built from stone and mud. Um, One of the other similarities they had too was hieroglyphic written language. Some of the earliest known written languages came from Egyptian and Mayan cultures. They used hieroglyphics to tell tales, record business, and to teach others in their society. The use of animal symbols combined to form words and sentences, with the symbols altering the word's use. The Egyptian text has mostly been decoded, while the Mayan text is still mostly unknown. One of the other contributions they also had was the calendars, mathematics, and astrology. The Egyptians and the Mayans both figured out how the mathematical concept of zero, which was unknown before that, before their time, they used math to help in agriculture and trade. Calendars were used by both empires for religious purposes, as well as to time the seasons for planting and harvesting. Egypt also used calendars to time the flooding of the Nile River, while the Mayans used the calendar to time harvesting of crops. Uh, the study of the sky, astrology, helped to maintain the creation of the calendars as well as way for navigation. Uh, Both civilizations mapped the stars as well as the paths of the sun and the moon. Um, Now they had a lot of differences though still too. The pyramids were very different. They built them for different reasons and in different ways, different structures. Um, they basically Egypt built their pyramids with the four corners, but with a point at the tip, and the Mayans built it with a flat top on top of it, with more of a steps instead of a steep slope like the Egyptians. Um, Now, the Egyptians built their pyramids for burial purposes, for the pharaohs and the higher ranked citizens, while the Mayans built the pyramids as a place for rituals, sacrifices, and palaces for the kings or other nobles. Sometimes kings were buried at the pyramids for Mayans, but it was mostly seen as a way for a priest to climb and get closer to talk with the gods and offer their sacrifices. Um, Egypt built tombs within the pyramids to keep the mummified remains of the elites. They would place the mummy in a sarcophagus and surround him with things that will help him in the afterlife, could be including slaves. Um, Another difference was government. Egypt and Maya had very different governments. Egypt was ruled by a pharaoh who was considered a descendant from God. This was a form of monarchy where the pharaoh was able to rule unchallenged, and he would elect officials to help carry out his rule. Maya was not united and was based on a feudal system with many powerful city-states. They had a king, but it is believed that the powerful families were the ones in control. Again, due to the lack of knowledge on the Mayan written language, we still don't know the exact details of their government. The River Valley civilizations are another difference between Egypt and Maya. All early civilizations needed some form of water supply to grow a large population. The most common water supply used was from River Valley civilizations. They were able to help sustain large growing cities. Egypt used the Nile River to grow large amounts of food. The Nile flooded annually and provided fertile soil, and it was also easily timed. And the calm river of the Nile also helped for transportation and trade, which kept ancient Egypt relatively close to the Nile River. So most of their cities would just be growing down along the Nile River. Egypt was also surrounded by mostly desert, which also added to their growth. Due to the isolation from hostile nomads, they were able to develop a lot more secure. Maya was centered around modern-day Mexico and Guatemala, which had a wet tropical environment. In the swampy lowlands, the Maya built raised earth platforms surrounded by canals on which they could grow crops in their dense forests. They used a slash and burn technique to create a flat earth to plant crops. This also helped to contribute to a more fertile soil for them to grow in as well. Some of the reasons for their similarities, based on their religion, most early religions formed based on the unknown effects from weather, death, and the sky. The evolution of religion used many different gods to answer these questions. Since humans seem very different from all other animals, both empires had gods and animal features. The gods also had human-like personalities, such as gods fighting each other. Another reason for the similarity for pyramids, the pyramids were constructed for religious purposes for both empires. They both believed in sun and sky gods and believed the ascension to the afterlife would be helped by building tall pyramids. The hieroglyphs inscribed on the walls of the pyramids for both empires tell stories of their religions. Hieroglyphs, the reason that religion played another significant role in the creation of written language. Hieroglyphics was basically written down from the oral traditions that were passed down for generations before that, and religious stories were part of their traditions. Priests were considered the elite class in both empires and were usually the only ones taught how to write, to read and write. And so it was limited to the amount of people who could read and write all their hieroglyphics. Another reason for the similarities between the mathematics, calendars, and astrology, math was essential for trade and agriculture and was developed for those purposes. Surpluses in food would be stored and counted to keep track of the supply. Calendars and astrology were created for the dual purpose of religious festivals and timing of the seasons. These led to better timing to planting the seeds and for harvesting. It just made it for easier work, so they'd have more free time. Religious festivals were usually timed with the seasons as well, too. Astrology had another purpose for navigation, which helped them travel farther distances for trade and conquests. Now, the reasons for the differences. The pyramids, Egypt society saw the pharaohs as gods and felt it was their duty to make sure the pharaoh made it to the other gods. Uh, so they were very driven for that purpose. The pyramids were thought of as the best way for them to ascend to heaven. The tombs created in the pyramids contain all the tools to help them get there. Uh, Mayans built the pyramids to appease the gods. Most temples were constructed with steps that could be climbed to the flat surface, unlike the pointed tips of the Egyptian pyramids. The Mayans also built on top of each of the other previous pyramids from kings and nobles before them, just to build higher and more as the cities grew larger. The Mayans also built the pyramids for the living, and the Egyptians built the pyramids for the afterlife. So that's the main reason for their differences. The difference for their governments, Egypt was isolated and it had a strong religious center around the pharaoh. The predictable flooding of the Nile, the ice, and the isolation of the vast surrounding desert helped to maintain a long dynasty of pharaohs. Religion helped to subordinate the citizens and maintain control. People are more willing to follow a leader if he is thought of as a god. The combination of isolation, dynasty longevity, and the Nile River contributed to that stability of Egypt. The Mayans developed cities separated by great distances. Depending on their success would determine how much of the city grew, such as Tikal, which had over 100,000 people living in it. The Mayans created a feudal system to unite these cities. The feudal system had kings living at the capital, which was the most dominant city at the time. The surrounding cities were controlled by nobles. And the only unifying factor that they had, which actually kept them together, was religion. But the feudal system would be the reason for the Mayans' failure as a lasting civilization. Now, the difference for the River Valley civilizations is just the amount of water supply. So the Nile River provided water and nutrient soil, rich soil that could support large agriculture. So that was able to feed a large growing city or cities. The Mayans developed farming techniques in the swampy lowlands due to the water resources available there. They built canals to get the water going to the raised growing beds. To get a better soil, they slashed and burned all the dense forests in the area they wanted to grow. All the ash and everything created a more nutrient-rich soil. Both empires needed a good water supply and nutrient-rich soil to grow enough food to sustain a large population, and that was their techniques, and it just happened to be different based on their different environments. The impacts that they had on modern society, Egypt created paper. Egypt created paper using the papyrus plant. They used this to keep records for trading and even was a major export for trade to other neighboring civilizations. They used the stem of the papyrus plant and tore them down into strips. They glued them together and wetted the water. They were then left to dry under pressure from two flat rocks. This innovation spread throughout Europe and Asia. Paper today is not the same as Egypt's, but it is a result of their innovation. Egypt and Mayan architectural, astrological, and mathematical contributions. The building of the temples and the pyramids, which are still standing today, have been studied during modern times. The buildings show off the advanced architectural style of each civilization. Sculptures such as the Sphinx in Egypt and the Mayans' Palenque Temple of the Cross are great examples of their skills. Both use the stars, moon, and sun to help create calendars and time the seasons for better agricultural production. The calendars created in the Mayan Empire were better than the Spanish when they arrived in South America later on, after Maya's collapse. Egypt's calendar was based on a 12-month lunar cycle that would coincide with the flooding of the Nile River. Advancements off these astrological contributions helped us to have the current Gregorian calendar. Mathematical contributions, such as the concept of zero, laid the foundations for current mathematical knowledge. This definitely helped them during their times, and we just constantly built upon it as we evolved, and it just got better. The Mayans, they helped create ball courts. The first ball games were created out of religious rituals, but also formed as entertainment for the people in Maya. They used rubber ball to have players compete for freedom or their lives. Their games are a little harsher than our current ball games, but they sure had an influence on society's major pastime, soccer. Now the conclusion, it's easy to see how Egypt was different from the Maya societies, based on how they advanced different ways on their environments. But even more interesting is their similarities. They both shared polytheistic religious beliefs, built pyramids, used hieroglyphs, and advanced our understanding in math, calendars, and astrology. With different reasons to build pyramids, different government structures, and different ways the empires grew, you can see how they both were still unique. Their contributions laid the foundations to modern times today.